Good morning and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to UTJ's Book Talk with Rabbi Wayne Allen, author of The Philosophers Torah. My name is Noah Grodowski. I'm the secretary of UTJ. Please note this program is being recorded. Also, everyone is muted, but we welcome comments and questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to address those questions after Rabbi Allen's presentation. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone who has sponsored this program. I am putting their names in the chat. That includes our season sponsors, Juan Mesa Freidel, in honor of Rabbi Professor Reuven Kimmelman, one of the most outstanding teachers I've ever had. He has done a lot of webinars with us. You can see those videos on our website. By myself, in honor of the many rabbis, scholars, and lay people who make UTJ what it is, and by Baruch Weiss in memory of Professor David Weiss Halivni and Dr. Tzipora Hagar Halivni. Our friends, Rabbi Ira Gerscott, Mitch Morrison, in appreciation of Rabbi Allen for his incredible contributions to halacha, faith, and philosophy, and by Heather Spiro. I'd also like to thank everyone who made a donation along with their registration for this program. For those who are new to J, I'll give a brief introduction. The Union for Traditional Judaism is a group of rabbis, scholars, and lay people who advocate for a passionate, open-minded approach to Torah study and observance of Jewish law, halakha, rooted in classical religious sources and informed by modern scholarship. Our philosophy is distinguished by the symbiotic relationship between faith in the God-given Torah and intellectual integrity, and our emphasis on the sacred framework of halakha as our unifying guide. Learn more about UTJ at www.utj.org. And let me also note that we have our next program is a book talk with Rabbi David Novak, author of God Talk, on Sunday, August 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Israel time. And I'm going to be putting a link to that information into the chat right now. With that, let me introduce our speaker. After graduating from New York University with a BA in philosophy and Phi Beta Kappa, Rabbi Allen attended the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he earned a master's degree in rabbinics and went on to receive rabbinic ordination. He served as a congregational rabbi for 35 years, taking on postings in New York City, Los Angeles, and Toronto. The Jewish Theological Seminary conferred an honorary doctorate of divinity upon him for his years of dedicated service. Rabbi Allen was awarded a master's degree in philosophy from York University in Toronto, where he went on to earn his PhD. He has taught Jews and non-Jews of all ages in formal and informal settings, including the American Jewish University, the University of Waterloo, the Community Hebrew Academy of Toronto, and Camp Ramah in California. Rabbi Allen has been a part of UTJ for decades, including serving on its panel of halachic inquiry and as editor of the first 2 volumes of Tamech Halacha, the responsive collection of UTJ, all of which I should add is on our UTJ website and the Viewpoint section. Rabbi Allen is author of numerous books, including The Philosophers Torah, which he will be speaking about today. You can purchase Rabbi Allen's books from the UTJ bookstore at utj.org/books, and I will put that link into the chat, of course. And with that, and with great thanks to Rabbi Allen for joining us and sharing with us this morning, I turn the program over to Rabbi Allen.
Thank you, Noah, and good morning, all. As I was listening to this introduction, I'm sure that my mother, Aleh Shalom, would have loved to hear every single word of it. But one part, I don't know, I think it's a bit of exaggeration. Numerous books, 6 to be exact. So I'm not sure whether 6 qualifies as numerous. But I'm working on 3 others. So I suppose when it gets up to, perhaps it may get up to double digits and it could be numerous. But let me begin with a little bit of biography. I was first introduced to philosophy when I was in high school. I'm not sure whether high schools these days have as rigorous a curriculum as I had when I was in high school many years ago. But one of the things that we studied was Plato's Republic. And I was fascinated with it. And that led me to pursue as an undergraduate a degree in philosophy. And here I'm just going to add a little bit biographically. Um, I studied with two individuals who had a great impact on the way I proceeded to study in my career, both in philosophy as well as in Judaism. I had the privilege of studying with Israel Knox, a name that most people do not recognize now. But I happened to come across while flipping through the proceedings of the Rabbinical Assembly back in the 1960s that Israel Knox was cited for his opinions on a various number of issues that were being discussed at the time, and that surprised me. When I was studying with him at NYU, I knew he was Jewish, but I did not know the extent of his connection with institutions of Judaism. And the reason why I mention his name is because to this day, I remember a very important statement that he made with regard to the notion of faith. And I share it with you because I teach this to all of my students, adult or youth, because it has a bearing on where we are today. It was his definition of faith. And I'll leave this for you. If you want to hear more, I can send it to you, or perhaps when you get the recording, you'll hear it again. So faith, according to Israel Knox, is an affirmative answer by way of personal commitment to matters of ultimate concern, which reason must examine but cannot exhaust. I think this is the single best definition I've ever heard of faith. So faith is not believing in miracles. Faith is not in a pattern of beliefs in which you are accepting things that are unscientific or patently not true, but it lies in an area beyond what science and reason can adequately describe. So Israel Knox, influence on me. And at the same time at NYU, I studied with Sidney Hook. Again, is a name that is rarely heard anymore. But Sidney Hook had a very interesting career path. In the 1930s, he was an avid communist and socialist. And then after Stalin, he changed and he became a neoconservative. He was a phenomenal teacher and author of, in this case, numerous books. And he remained an influence on me as well. So even though a Jewish too, but marginally. So when I went on to fully commit to studying Judaism intensely, my interest in philosophy receded, but never disappeared entirely. Because what I discovered, the more I learned encountering Jewish sources, I found myself saying, I have seen this before in the writings of philosophers. And I stored all of that information away, became compartmentalized for me until I decided, now that I have the time following retirement, to then take what I believe to be important philosophical insights, sometimes agreeing with what is in the Torah, sometimes disputing what is in the Torah, but in all instances correlating to what is in the Torah. And I believe this would be very useful for people today, thoughtful people who are interested in finding information that relates to how others, rather than just Jews, interpret the Torah or apply them to certain thorny situations and circumstances in contemporary life. So that became the point of origin for this book. And someone asked me, how long did it take you to write this? And I said, a lifetime. Because it's cumulative. It's nothing that I sat down and wrote out, but it is the cumulative information that I've collected over the course of many years. The actual physical writing or committing to text, everything that I have, took about a year. So if people want to know how long does it take to quote unquote write a book, it's very short time, but getting the information that goes into it takes a lifetime. What do philosophy and Torah have in common? In my opinion, both are pursuing truth with a capital T. Not facts, but truth, namely those things that exist beyond historical events or practical definitions. These are ideas, and these are values that live independently of any one particular case or cause. In that both philosophy and Torah are interested in addressing the question, what makes for the best life or the best way of living, not just what is factually true, they then coincide. So what you will find in the book, The Philosopher's Torah, is a parsha by parsha exposition of some of the psukim, some of the passages in the Torah, and where I append to it what philosophers have said in this regard. Now, it ended up that after I completed the work, I went back, did a total. I've forgotten exactly what it is. Over 70 philosophers have been mentioned. And I don't assume that everyone will be familiar with the names of all of these philosophers or their accomplishments. So what I've also done, if you have the book, you will have seen this, that in the back of the book, I have included what I call snapshots of the philosophers. No more than 3 or 4 sentences about every philosopher that I've cited with their dates when they are known, so that people can gain a better perspective. And sometimes if they want to do further research, they will see some of the main texts of these philosophers, so they can go to the library and they can look it up. Some people ask me, towards what end did you publish this book? In other words, for who is the audience of your book? Publishers always want to know this because they want to know how they're marketing what they might publish. So the way I describe it is that anyone who is interested in studying Parshat HaShavua, which should be all of us, would have ample use of the book because you can turn to it and you can see, well, Rashi says this. Maybe there's something in philosophers that will dispute Rashi or support Rashi. I'd be interested in knowing. So you can read my book. And that's exactly the way it's arranged. It's arranged parsha by parsha, much like Mikraot Gedolot. The only difference is instead of seeing the works of Sforno and Ramban and Rashi and Kli Yakar, you're seeing Plato and Aristotle and Nietzsche and Descartes. So that's what you will find in this book. It's also very useful for congregational rabbis, rabbis who are preparing either Divrei Torah or sermons on a given Shabbat, and they want to add content to what they are saying, thoughtful content. So it's not necessarily in the realm of anecdotal material, but additional material, which I believe would enhance a presentation of what rabbis or speakers would be using in addressing congregations over the course of Shabbat. So very useful for them. For philosophers, and I have to use the term very loosely, when I was a graduate student in philosophy, all of my teachers in seminars and the like would refer to us as philosophers, and I thought that rather odd. I didn't consider myself a philosopher. I considered myself a student of philosophy. But apparently that's the nomenclature, that if you study philosophy, you automatically become a philosopher. Okay. So when I was in my studies of philosophy, I thought that this would be a wonderful avenue to explore because it provides supplemental material to what I otherwise would have learned by Mikraot Gedolot. And it also shows sometimes the confluence of ideas. We'll see an example of that today between philosophers and commentators. Okay, that's all by way of general background. I thought the best way for me to expose you to the content of my book is to just go through a sample. So what I'm going to share with you now is Parshat Ekev, which is the Parshat HaShavua for this coming Shabbat, as we all know. And I'm going to show you the Pasuk, and we're going to look at several philosophical commentators on the Pasuk. When I first, this is just an aside, when I first pursued looking for a publisher, the Jewish Publication Society of America, which ultimately rejected the publication of this book, and I'll tell you the reason in a moment, they said, Rabbi, this is great stuff, but you can't publish it with just the raw comments of philosophers. Our readers require Rashi. Our readers require explanations because some of the philosophers don't speak in the language that ordinary readers would be able to understand. Could you expand? If you expatiate on some of these ideas, then we could better tell whether this would be in our publishing regime. So I did. So I took the first pasuk in the Torah, Breshit 1:1, Breshit bara Hashem et hashamayim and earth, and all the philosophical commentary that I had, and with my explanations, just this one pasuk came out to 43 pages. So when the editorial staff at JPS saw that if one pasuk is 43 pages, this is an enterprise that's well beyond what we could publish. So I said, instead of just narrowing it down and say the Philosophers Torah on Breshit, which might have been a doable process, that would just give me, 5 more volumes to work on. I wasn't prepared to do that. So instead, I came to the conclusion that I would just produce the philosophical comments on their own, the unexpurgated, unexplained text, which in most cases can be understood by those who would apply themselves to it, and let readers deduce their own opinion on how this fits in with the Torah, and if they need further explanation, they could do it on their own. I'm counting on the intelligence of my audience, and I know that's something that most authors don't do this day, but that's what I was hoping for, because I believe the philosophers ought to speak for themselves. I didn't want to get into a battle, a tug and war with experts on Descartes, who, if I explained Descartes in a particular way, would take issue with it. And then we're dealing with debating the finer points of the philosophers rather than the general approach that I am taking, that this is useful in understanding the Torah. So that's why when we see the text, it may read a little bit more philosophically oriented than you're perhaps used to, but we'll see that in a moment. So let me share my screen with you. I'm very thankful to my editor, Jonathan Freeman, for coming up with some of the captions and the style that goes into the book, because as you see, he tried to make it less formal and more approachable by including some graphics. So here you see every parsha has this, and it includes the Hebrew as well. It's Parshat Dekef. So let's take a look at the first pasuk. So this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 16. If you have a Chumash, you may want to take a look at the Hebrew. I'm not going to take time to do that right now. All the translations here are from the JPS, the new JPS translation. Sometimes I had to make some alterations because in the new JPS translation, instead of every time that the tetragrammaton appears, they actually include that in Hebrew, Yud K Vav K, and I didn't want to include that in the text. I'm not assuming that people would be able to decode it, but also I didn't want to complicate things. So in those situations, I replace that with the word God or Lord, depending where it is. Okay. Here is the comment. You shall destroy all the peoples that your God delivers to you, showing them no pity, and you shall not worship their gods, for that would be a snare to you. The last part of this pasuk is less interesting to me, right? You shall not worship their gods, for that would be a snare to you. I think is understood. Foreign gods would undermine the one God, and this would, in effect, nullify the commitment to the one God and Torah. So I think that's understandable. Most people would get it that Judaism is a unique religion. In this case, we're talking about Israelite religion. It is unique, and to preserve something that is unique, you have to insist on its exclusivity. That makes sense. It's the first part of the pasuk that I think is most relevant, particularly for people today, and again, particularly for people in the Western world, and particularly for those who are woke or are leaning towards wokeness. So let's review this again. You shall destroy all the peoples that your God delivers to you, showing them no pity. Now, of course, someone who reads that today would think this is genocide, that the Torah is championing genocide. And I may be wrong here, I don't think I am, but I would venture to say that there's some people today who would say this is evidence of Israel's attempt to commit genocide against the people. It's inherent in Judaism itself because this is what Jews hold sacred and this is what Jews do. Therefore, anti-Semitism is justified. Now, I may be exaggerating. I don't think I am, unfortunately. But what do philosophers have to say about this concept? You shall destroy all the peoples that your God delivers them to you, showing them no pity. Let's take a look at Aristotle. Now, if you're not familiar with Aristotle, Aristotle was a student of Plato, and we're talking about in the 4th century, before the Common Era. Aristotle was much more a describer of the physical world than he was a speculator about it. Plato was a very practical philosopher. His student Aristotle is best known for his way of grappling with reality and being able to explain it in terms that are very sensible and reasonable. So here you will see an explanation of pity. This is what pity is, according to Aristotle. Pity is a feeling of pain caused by the sight of some evil which befalls one who does not deserve it, and which we might expect to befall ourselves soon. I included the ellipses here because I want to make the statement as compact as it can without some of the other comments here, which I thought took away from the main point, but it doesn't disturb in any way, shape, or form what Aristotle is saying. Okay, so pity is a feeling of pain. Why do we experience the sense of pity? Because we see someone suffering, and we feel that that suffering is unmerited. They did not deserve it. And that which happened to others might very well happen to us too. And we would not enjoy it if it happened to us. So when we see it happening to others, we feel for them. Today, we would call this empathy. So it's a feeling of pain caused by the sight of some evil, which befalls one who does not deserve it, and which we might expect to befall ourselves soon. That's Aristotle's definition. He is not challenging what is in the Torah. He's just telling us that when you enter the promised land and God delivers to you all the inhabitants, you have to utterly destroy them and not feel ashamed or empathetic in any way. Not feel proud of what you do, but for very practical reasons. They have to be totally annihilated so they do not deter you from worshiping the one God. You should not feel this sense of pain for them. Okay. I am not going to comment further on it other than say that Aristotle is just recognizing what the feeling is. And now we can understand the pasuk from the perspective of applying Aristotle's definition. When we get to Spinoza, who died in 1677, whether you want to call him Baruch Spinoza or Benedict Spinoza, or you know of his situation in Holland where he was put under a ban by Menashe ben Israel, all of these factors, less important to me now than what he says. Now, Spinoza is considered to be one of the first modern philosophers. You see here that he wrote and published in the year of his death a magnum opus called The Ethics. And in it, he says, a man who lives according to the dictates of reason strives as far as he can not to be touched by pity. Now, I find this quite remarkable because he says pity is something that is at odds with reason. A person who follows the dictates of reason is someone who would be untouched by pity. Pity seems to be a second-rate emotion only available or applied to those who fail to use reason. Now, if we were to apply Spinoza to what we have in the Torah, where it tells us you should have no pity, you should eliminate all of the, let's call it, I can't say that they were indigenous, but the inhabitants of Israel at the time of entry into the land. If you eliminate them because you fear that they would undermine monotheism and the worship of the one God, you shouldn't at all be influenced by a sense of pity because you're following the dictates of reason. It is reasonable to fear that a unique and potentially vulnerable religion, because it is a minority religion, might be in jeopardy. So eliminating the threat makes perfectly good sense. If you want to come up with a different application or a different division, you might very well. But here's what Nietzsche has to say. Nietzsche also is a very interesting personality. I'm not going to get into a discussion of whether he was an anti-Semite or not. There have been a number of well-researched books that have been written on Nietzsche. I don't believe he was an anti-Semite. He has some perfectly wonderful things to say about Jews, as well as some awful things but mostly his venom is directed to Christianity. Maybe that's a good thing too. In any case, this is what he says about pity. Pity preserves things that are ripe for decline. It defends things that have been disowned and condemned by life, and it gives a depressive and questionable character to life itself by keeping alive an abundance of failures of every type. People have dared to call pity a virtue. People have gone even further, making it into the virtue, the foundation and source of all virtues. Pity negates life. It makes life worthy of negation. Pity is the practice of nihilism. Pity wins people over to nothingness. Now, Nietzsche is always very hard to understand. Sometimes statements seem clear, but upon further investigation loses its clarity. And sometimes it is very obtuse, difficult to make out what he has to say. And oftentimes Nietzsche is contradictory. So there's a lot of effort that has to be given into understanding Nietzsche. But let's look at the second passage. Pity stands in opposition to all the tonic passions that augment the energy of the feeling of aliveness. It is a depressant. A man loses power when he pities. Nietzsche is interested in creating a personality that challenges the norms. Sometimes a reference to the Übermensch, the overman, the great man, the one who exceeds what the imposed norms of society will be. But what he has to say here is that pity is not a good thing to have. It's not a virtue. Now, people lay claim to it and say that it is a virtue, perhaps the ultimate virtue, but is something that is awful, because when you pity, whether it's people or whether it's a situation, it not only negates life. What this means we'll try to unravel. It makes life worthy of negation. This is more interesting, because life itself is filled with ups and downs, with good and bad. And the bad helps shape character. In the continuation, not in the continuation, what he says in The Will to Power, which is a passage that begins here and continues on the next page. You just see a little snippet here. He says, suffering is good, because it's the person who suffers learns to overcome the suffering. And that's what life is mostly about. It's about overcoming. To have pity on someone denies him the challenges that will lead to overcoming. So when you pity the poor person, the disabled, you are just perpetuating their sad state of affairs, never allowing them to go above and beyond what is holding them back. So that's why it's a negation of everything that is worthy in life. And he goes even further, because that's the way Nietzsche talks. It's negation of life itself. So Nietzsche believes that pity is not a good thing to have. He would agree with what is in the Torah, have no pity for these nations, but perhaps he would give a different reason for why that should be the case. I came back recently from a trip to visit family. While I was away, I was doing some reading. I don't know if you're familiar with the psychologist Gad Saar. If you haven't heard his name, I'm going to recommend it to you. He's written several important books. The latest one that he's published is called, I will tell you in a second, give me a second. The latest one is called Suicidal Empathy. Suicidal Empathy. And the subtitle is Dying to Be Kind. Dying to Be Kind by God, G-A-D, Saad, S-A-A-D. Now, a little bit of his biography is in order. He is a Lebanese Jew who in 1975, under the threat of the civil war in Lebanon, escaped with the members of his family. He ultimately came to the United States. He is a professor of psychology, and what he writes in his book, and he also has a podcast, by the way, is that the West has endangered itself because of the fact that it has made empathy the ultimate virtue. And as a result, it has hindered reason that up to now had guided the course of Western civilization. And he gives many examples in his book. I'm not going to go through it right now for you, but it's a relatively short book, about 160 or so pages, and I recommend it. He's got an earlier work that makes the same theme. So God Saad, from the perspective of psychology, would say that those who insist on judging everything by virtue of feeling for others, no matter what, are just laying the grounds for their own demise. If we put all of this together, it gives us, and by the way, on the ensuing pages, you see here page 253. I don't have the time now to go on to page 254, where you can see some further statements on this, but this gives you a sampling of what is there. We would see that this notion that is challenged from the get-go by many contemporaries, that showing pity to others is not necessarily the value that we would endorse philosophically. Aristotle is neutral. Spinoza, who is a paragon considered to be a paragon of modern ethics, and even Nietzsche would agree that pity is not the attitude that should inform our behavior. So I don't feel as, well, let me put it, as alone in this notion that empathy is needed to make the world a better place, although there's some philosophers who say that, and Schopenhauer does say that. He's on the next page, where Schopenhauer says that this is an extremely valuable thing, and empathy will ensure that people live good and ethical lives. But we also have the opposite expression. And I thought that this would be important to share. Knowing that there are contemporary psychologists who also see value in this is just a bonus. So by looking at, this is just a sampling. There are other things that I say in this parsha. It's not the only thing that is there, but this gives you a kind of perspective of how this can enrich the student of Torah. And I could foresee someone who is giving a sermon today, basically on what we see in the world around us, and in the increasingly woke world, even though it's being challenged various ways, politically and otherwise, that there is grounds here to say that there's philosophical support about this as well, philosophical and psychological. So it's not the Torah off on its own, claiming territory that is just offensive to the modern mind, but here we can see a demonstrable acceptance of what is in the Torah by those who would otherwise think would be, from the perspective of philosophy, opposed to it. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to allow for questions. And please feel free to address to me your questions, and we'll see if we can have a discussion for the next 15 minutes or so.
Okay, people are welcome to put any questions or comments in the chat, or if you want to unmute, we should be able to manage that. While we await people doing that, I wanted to ask Rabbi Allen if there are other emotions that we might see as similar to pity that some of the philosophers you quoted might be more comfortable with. For instance, things like compassion. And, if so, what would be the distinctions between those different emotions?
On the very next page, as I alluded to, Schopenhauer says the following. I don't have this on the screen, but I can read it for you. Schopenhauer says, boundless compassion for all living beings is the surest and most certain guarantee of pure moral conduct and needs no casuistry. Whoever is filled with it, meaning compassion, will assuredly injure no one, do harm to no one, encroach on no man's rights. He will rather have regard for everyone, forgive everyone, help everyone as far as he can, and all his actions will bear the stamp of justice and loving kindness. So here you see the opposite perspective expressed to a very high degree by a very credible philosopher. By the way, Schopenhauer is often considered to be the philosopher of doom and gloom. So here saying something that is, I would say, eminently positive is certainly out of character. I would disagree with Schopenhauer, but I will leave, again, my comments not as important as bringing the relevant passages to people. So those who would defend empathy, and empathy similar to compassion, Noah, as you suggested, would find a friend in Schopenhauer who would say that is absolutely the best emotion that one could have because he says it harms no one, encroaches on no one's rights. He will rather have regard for everyone, forgive everyone, help everyone as far as they can. I think there's great evidence in the world today that those who show boundless empathy have, it's very unreasonable because someone does get affected from the other side. An example, let's call it transgendered sports. That those who want to champion that those who are transgendered, let's say a transgender female, used to be a man, now a woman competing against other women. This is great because it emphasizes transgender rights. So it's in their favor, but does it not harm the females who aren't born with the same degree of strength and musculature as men? Doesn't it put them at a disadvantage? I mean, it's relatively minor case here, if you consider it as such, but it's evidence that Schopenhauer doesn't really get it. He claims that you can't go wrong with having boundless compassion. Boundless compassion, by the way, would also mean compassion for the terrorists.
I guess it also begs questions of to where compassion is due when there are different multiple actors in a given situation. So I was interested in a perhaps a more nuanced
Right.
perspective versus saying all good, all bad, but like more
distinct.
situational. I see Rabbi Griscott wanted to
Yes,
offer a
very
question.
eagerly. Yeah.
I was concerned also, Rabbi, with the same, basically the philosophers that you've quoted so far. It's what's missing for me is quote unquote relativity, meaning it's all or nothing at all insofar as pity and or compassion, empathy. Do any of the philosophers make the distinction that I think the Torah makes, which is you pity those who are deserving of pity, whereas you make a distinction, meaning the enemy. It's not, turn the other cheek, love thy enemy, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And I've not yet seen the distinction when we talk about either pity or compassion of whether it applies to those on our side, so to speak, and those who are out and outright called enemies, if you will.
Yeah,
So,
certainly a legitimate concern. But remember, my task today is not to read through the entirety of the book and the entirety of the Torah. It's rather to take a sample of one pasuk and see how the book operates. So you're asking for a larger question. To answer that larger question, you would have to then turn to the various psukim in the Torah, such as care for the poor and respect for those who are in need, caring for those with disabilities, and you will get a different story. So my objective here is not to write a thesis on compassion, but rather to show
I understand
sample passages that explore what philosophers might say about what the Torah is talking about. Yeah.
Right. Meaning that you've properly zoomed in on pity related to compassion, related to empathy, with the understanding that the philosophers you quoted view that in toto, independent of a relational kind of distinction.
That is true.
Whether it's your friend, whether it's yourself or your enemy. Okay.
And that is true. And when you consider the pasuk here, the pasuk is not relative. It says that when you get to this land, you will destroy all the inhabitants. It doesn't say you shall destroy the evil inhabitants. You shall destroy the oppressive inhabitants.
That's a good point.
And save the good inhabitants or the moral inhabitants.
Right.
It's all the inhabitants. Right.
Right.
So if we understand that, then you understand also why I made the choice that I did.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments which are welcome to be more broadly about Rabbi Allen's book as opposed to particularly the example he provided?
Okay, I see a question in the chat. How did Maimonides interpret this Torah passage? Now, remember, Maimonides is not a commentator like I'm going to say Rashi as an example because he's the commentator par excellence. But even Rashi doesn't comment on everything that's in the Torah. He is selective. So if you're going to ask me, how did Maimonides interpret this Torah passage? My answer is, I don't know. But certainly that's a task that anyone can undertake. There are several books that I know of called Maimonides on the Torah, where you can get a collection of all his comments from Moreh Nevuchim, from Guide of the Perplexed, and the Mishnah Torah, where all his comments have been collected, and you can go through it and see if he says anything on this. I don't know that he does, but that would be an interesting outcome of reading my book. I would say I have percolated sufficient thought that people now feel motivated to look up other commentators to see how that fits in. So if that's the case, then thank you. I feel very much complimented.
Can I ask, Rabbi Allen, are there particular philosophers that you found through collating this material to have, particularly interesting perspectives towards ideas of Torah? Some like standouts in your compilation?
Hard to pick. It's like, trying to select a favorite flavor or a favorite color. There are many philosophers. I'll tell
Mint
you some.
chocolate chip, obviously.
Yes. Yeah, okay, fine. I would not necessarily, if I looked at the totality of philosophical comment, I would say that Plato still remains for me the go-to philosopher. Alfred North Whitehead, who was a philosopher in his own right, he's the one who said that all of Western philosophy is essentially a commentary on Plato. So if there's a place to start and a place to go, it would be Plato. And if there is a particular dialogue in Plato that I think is most relevant for those of us who are studying Torah, it's his dialogue called Laws, Laws, Laws. It's one of his later dialogues, and it doesn't include Socrates. Interestingly, it includes a figure called the Athenian, who is in a dialogue, that's why it's called a dialogue, with others about what laws would make up the best society. And it's wide-ranging, and it covers many of the laws that we have in the Torah from a different perspective. I would say that would be a pretty good place to go. I always like going back to Plato. If all else fails, you would go to Plato. I'm also going to suggest one other thing that I came into contact with because it was I think unexpected. And I'm just going to look it up for 1 second here. Yeah. How many of you, I know that Rabbi Brody does, but how many of you know the name Kripke? And not from watching Big Bang Theory. Okay. Okay. So the elder Kripke, who's a rabbi in Kansas City, was St. Louis. I think, in Omaha, right. So Rabbi Kripke, senior in Omaha, Nebraska, happened to have a neighbor. And his neighbor did very well for him by investing his money. Kripke didn't know that he was, what?
Awesome, whatever they call them.
Yeah, it was Warren Buffett was his neighbor.
Awesome Buffett.
Yes, and Warren Buffett invested his money, and he ended up doing very, very well. And the senior Kripke made a very large donation to the Jewish Theological Seminary of New York.
The library, the burning library.
Correct. So, so that's the senior Kripke. Now, Saul Kripke was his son, and he was the oldest son who became a distinguished professor of philosophy at the City University of New York and then on at Princeton University. And most of ordinary folk do not know his name, but he was one of the most important philosophers of the last half of the 20th century, with a particular interest in analytical philosophy, of modal logic and semantics. And when I came across his name, immediately it drew to mind his father, and then I noticed the connection. So I suppose in a way it's interesting to see that included in the Philosophers Torah is the son of a conservative rabbi.
I appreciate everyone joining us today. I want to thank again our sponsors, whose names I am putting into the chat right now. Thanks, of course, to Rabbi Allen for his time and for presenting this material and putting together what looks like an excellent resource. And I look forward to learning through it probably in the next parasha cycle. Please register to join our next program, which is a book talk with Rabbi David Novak, author of God Talk, which will be on Sunday, August 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Israel time. And I have put a link into the chat with where to register for that, as well as where you can find a link to purchase the Philosophers Torah. We welcome your feedback on this program. A feedback link is in the chat and will be included in the email that everyone will receive with the video from today's program. With that, thanks to everyone for joining us on this beautiful Sunday. At least it's beautiful in my area. Hope it's beautiful in yours. And look forward to seeing you at future UTJ programs.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. Good day, all. Great seeing some new friends, old friends, and always a pleasure to help support the UTJ. And I'm just going to add a personal comment that the UTJ is the organization that all of us should support for the dissemination of Torah that is characteristic of the kind of serious study, but also faithful to our tradition. It needs all of our support, and I encourage everyone to do what they can to help support the organization.
We're going to have to use that as a PSA in the future. Thank you, Rabbi Allen.
Okay. Bye.
Go to.